It's because cybersecurity being
Okay, so I have posted self-evaluation from, I want you to evaluate me as an instructor. I think the deadline is passed or not? If not, so then I gave you a time period of like 1 week to fill that survey. It is not mandatory, it is not graded, but I would appreciate if you can respond to that survey, okay? And second thing is about I made an announcement about class participation forms and the reading notes for this week. So class participation forms, we are still covering the same paper. You are not supposed to read that 34-page paper about return-oriented programming. So there will be no reading notes this week, but still I encourage you if you can at least skim the paper or at least read if only its main idea, okay? But you are not supposed to submit any reading notes for that. However, you are supposed to submit the class participation form for both days, Tuesday and Thursday, okay? Anything else? Not on my side. So I think we can start the lecture, and also I would apologize for today's lectures, bad quality of slides, lesser number of slides, but I would like to cover the paper. Don't know, something happened with my reading speed of the paper, maybe because I'm working on writing grant proposals for NSF. So that is slowing me down. Okay. So last time we had covered up to section 4. So the section 5 basically talks about, actually it is still section 4. So it talks of section 4.5. It talks about the categorization of the protection policies that were existing at that time. And also details of each of them, and then why they are not adopted widely, or if they are their pros and cons, like for example, what is the overhead, whether they are compatible with the existing legacy code or not, and so forth. So like you can divide into two different categories. The current protection approaches. One is like probabilistic, and the other is deterministic approaches. So probabilistic approaches are like examples are ISR, which is instruction set randomization. I will explain what it is. ASLR, we have already at least have a high level understanding of how ASLR works, and DSR, data space randomization. Okay, so these approaches, they either randomize the location or they randomize the value of your code or data. So like every time when you run the program, either the data or the code will be mapped at a different location, or the value of the code or data which is visible to the user, or which is executed, it is different every time when you run the program. Okay. Deterministic approaches. These are the examples are like, for example, stack canaries. We have talked about them. Data execution prevention, which is also write exclusive E. Sorry for the mistake. So we have also discussed what is the basic idea of that, and dynamic binary instrumentation, which is like a common approach used by many different solutions. So their basic idea is that they enforce a policy, and then they monitor that whether when at the runtime that policy which they want to enforce is maintained or not. If not, they interpret any violation of a policy as an indication of like either a attack is in progress, or data is corrupted, or code is corrupted. Okay. So they'll flag any violation as either code or data is compromised. Probability of successful attack in case of probabilistic approaches is always greater than 0, but for deterministic approaches, it can be greater than or equal to 0. So which basically means that deterministic approaches, they are more powerful as compared to the probabilistic one. Okay, so by the way, you can stop me anywhere and I will encourage you to stop and ask the questions if you have. Okay, and also please don't wait for the last 5 minutes to raise the questions and make your questions clear and meaningful. Okay, so how we can evaluate a protection policy, any given policy. So there are different parameters which we need to keep in mind when we are doing the evaluation, like how good it is at protecting against the attacks. Second, how much cost it incurs. Third, whether it is compatible with the whether it is compatible with the existing code, which basically means that do we need to do the porting or any kind of changes or modification in the existing code to apply a protection mechanism or not. So if a protection mechanism is just plug and play, so it means that and it don't need any input from a human being or from a programmer, then it is more preferable. Okay. So in case of protection, we have already in the previous lecture talked about it, that how we can measure the strength or the power of a policy in terms of providing the security. So it depends upon, we can measure it by quantifying the detection or the prevention rate. So ideally, what we want is that we want the detection or the prevention rate higher, not lower. So higher is good. And it basically means detection rate, as I explained last time, that let's say you launched 100 attacks, out of 100, how many attacks were successfully detected or prevented by your policy. So that defines your detection or prevention rate. False positive and negatives we have already discussed in the previous lecture. So we want them to be low, not high. Okay, so how can we measure the cost? So we can divide the cost into like two major factors. One is the performance overhead, and the other is memory overhead. So performance overhead is basically what you do is like you first run your program which you want to protect without enabling any protection mechanism and measure its execution time. Then you enable your protection mechanism and then run the program again. And now you measure its execution time again. So then you take the, you can calculate the overhead just simply by dividing the execution time with protection mechanism divided by execution time without protection mechanism. So that will give you the overhead. Okay. So if it is like, if the result of that division is 1, it means you have no overhead at all, which is not possible. So you will have some non-zero overhead anyway, because nothing is free. Okay. So it basically focuses on how, in the presence of the protection mechanism, how much execution, how much slowdown we observe in the execution of our application. So we actually want this performance overhead to be low, right? For a good, so if a protection mechanism has a low performance overhead, we will consider it as better as compared to the one which has higher. And memory overhead is like, definitely any protection mechanism you are using, it takes non-zero time to run, to complete, but it also takes some space in memory. Now, how much extra space we are using to enable the protection mechanism? So let's say without protection mechanism, we are using, our program takes, let's say 1 GB. And with protection mechanism enabled, the total memory consumed is, let's say 2 GB. So we have 2 times memory space overhead. Okay. And we also want the memory space overhead to be low. However, the memory space overhead is less of a concern as compared to the performance overhead. But why? Anyone want to answer? Which basically means, let's say you have 2 protection policies, A and B. A gives you lower performance, let's say 1% performance overhead, but 60% memory space overhead. Okay, and B gives you 60% performance overhead, but 1% memory space overhead. I'm saying I will select A, not B. Why? Why I'm not that much concerned with the memory space overhead?
This because memory is virtualized, so you can have any number of, like each program has its own virtual address space, so you can just in and out memory however you want. So you have that 60% for your policy protection, and then the rest you can just use as if it was normal. I don't know if that makes sense. Like you can still have pages in, page out and
Yeah, but if that is true, then we should not worry about memory space overhead at all, right? That is to start with, if virtualization is a solution to hide the memory space overhead, we should not worry about it even if it is less than 1,000 times higher, right?
So did you say that you choose performance overhead over the memory overhead?
Yeah, like, I mean, if we need to do the trade-off, we have no option, we have to trade off. If we like want to reduce the performance overhead, it will translate into higher memory space overhead. But then I'm saying it's fine, we can have
Okay.
higher memory
So
space
you
overhead,
would
why
rather
it is fine.
More memory overhead.
Yeah.
Than performance
Yeah.
overhead. And I think my answer to that would be the cost of memory is much
Yeah,
cheaper than performance.
that's one thing. So memory space, I mean, we can tolerate the memory, one thing. Second, from the user's perspective, I mean, let's say you are the client and I'm giving you a protection mechanism. For you, it doesn't matter how much memory is being consumed, because one, memory is cheaper. Second, you don't experience any delay in when you are running your program, even when the relatively very slow, very less delay or slow down as compared to no protection. Okay, so you will be like, you will be ready to tolerate a lower performance slowdown as compared to memory space overhead. Third thing is, the third criteria to evaluate is compatibility. So which also has like 3 different factors. Source compatibility. Source compatibility basically mean that if I have a production mechanism, let's say A, and I don't need to enable that on a given program, I don't need to make any changes in the source code. And even I don't need access to the source code. So then I'm saying that it is source code compatible or source code agnostic, which means that it doesn't matter whether I have access to the source code or not, I will be able to apply my protection mechanism. Now compare it with the case where you have a protection mechanism, but you can apply it only if you have access to the source code of the target application on which you want to apply it. So definitely its applicability will be reduced because you don't have the access to the source code all the time, right? Second is binary compatibility. So binary compatibility with unprotected modules. So basically it means like, okay, I have this protection mechanism A, which doesn't need access to the source code. If you only give me the binary, I can still apply the protection mechanism on that binary of your program. However, will my protection work if I am protecting your binary, but other modules, let's say other libraries which are linked with your binary, they are not under protection. So will it still work? The mechanism still work? If yes, then it is a preferable solution. If not, then it is not a preferable solution. And modularity support is basically, anyone want to explain?
Is it similar to containers
In what way?
in the way that you can have a container and send it to another computer without like affecting the system or having to configure the whole thing? So it has more compatibility across different systems.
What you are saying, containers, they are used for portability, and they are also used to isolate your program from the external world. But let me give you this. Let's say you have a container, and in container you are running your some application, and it also needs some libraries which are also hosted in the container. Okay. And then you have some protection mechanism which is enabled running inside the container. So modularity here, which means is that, let's say that protection mechanism needs some information or need to generate some information, which can be generated only if you have a global view of everything. If you have local view of only a single module, then that required information is cannot be generated. An example of that, which they have mentioned in the paper, is the 0.2 sets or 0.2 graphs. Okay, so basically, which means is like if you have a pointer, so what is 0.2 set or 0.2 graph? So if you have a pointer in your program and it is pointing to a memory object, so let's say you have this pointer and it is pointing inside this memory object, like this was allocated and it is pointing to some location in there. So this pointer points to this object, and this is the 0.2 set of the pointer. 0.2 set, okay. But the thing is, like, for these, can I just by looking at one module of my program, can I generate all the sets of the objects to which my pointer will point at different times during execution of my program? So let's say this is happening inside the user program which you have written, and then when you compile, you are linking some library into it. And during the legitimate execution of time, this pointer in a legitimate way points to another object in the library, right? But now to get its 0.2 set, you cannot only rely on analyzing or performing the pointer analysis on your own program. You have to have the global view of the things and runtime view of the things, so that you know at different times this pointer can possibly point to which set of objects. Okay. So if you have a protection mechanism which relies on global visibility of global construction of any kind of information it needs to work. This is just an example. 0.2 set is just an example of that information. So then it is not preferable. If it can work on local information by using the local information, it can still enable the protection. We will prefer it as compared to the one which needs the global. Okay. Okay, so remember in previous slide, we said that there are these three examples of probabilistic approaches: ISR, ASLR, and DSLR. DSR. So ISR, so it basically protects against code injection attacks. Any code injected by the attacker in your stack segment or your heap segment. Okay. But how it protects? Here is an example. Let's say you have a program, and then you translate it into assembly. Let's say it has some bunch of instructions in it, like let's say add, sub, jump, blah blah blah. Okay. Now we know that instructions are at the end of the day when everything completes, it is converted into binary. Let's say I present that binary into hexadecimal form, and this is the binary code of the add instruction, sub, jump. I'm just building up. This is not the correct hex code of, like, for example, in x86, you go and check the hex code of add will be something else. I'm just using some garbage values. Let's say this is the original binary code of these instructions. So what does it do is that instruction ISR, it will map these binary codes to a randomized translation. So it basically means that it will translate this binary code into another binary code, which is randomly selected. But then once selected, what you do is that you have, for each original value, you have an randomly generated another alternative binary code. But then you keep it fixed for one run of the process. You don't keep changing it within single run. Okay. So the binary code of add is, let's say, translated into this one. So same for sub and jump instruction. All right. And then this code is stored in your code segment. And when you execute your program, so that the code of the instruction is read from the memory, then it is mapped back to the original before execution, and then that original code is fed into your pipeline, okay? And then that is executed, okay? So now this is how it works. Now let's say if this is like the approach how ISR is working, and if an attacker wants to inject the code in the stack or the heap and want to execute it, so now what will the attacker do? He or she will inject the code which will translate into the original binary code, right? Let's say you inject the program that I want to inject, within that I have an add instruction. So in that, the original code of that add instruction will be injected in the stack of the heap. Let's say this is the code, okay, injected code, 0xFCD0. This is injected code. But then before it is being executed, it is translated back into, it needs to be translated back into the original code. So using this one, you look into the translation table. So you will not find any, there are two options. Either you will not find any translation entry for this input, right? You will not be able to, if not, it means it is an invalid code and your execution will stop. So your attack will fail. Other option is that you turn out to be lucky. So the code you injected is some kind of garbage. You don't inject the original code. You inject some kind of guess of randomized codes. So even if you if your guess is not successful, still you will fail. And if it is successful, maybe then you can your attack can succeed. Okay. But it is very difficult to, because every time when you run the process, you randomize the original codes into our table. So random codes. So it is very difficult for attacker to guess or predict that what are those randomized codes for each instruction. Okay. However, this approach or ISR is not used anymore. Why? Okay, let me help you to answer the question. So what was the purpose of ISR? To protect against injected code attacks, right? Mm-hmm. But now we are not using ISR. Why?
Too expensive?
Encryption.
It is expensive, yes. Okay, let me rephrase my question. That is correct, it is expensive. Let me rephrase my question. Is there anything else which can protect us against the same thing, same kind of attack?
Yes, or and CEP.
Yeah.
So it's kind of redundant.
Yeah.
Having both.
So it is expensive. Second, modern processors, they have the support to enable that. So like, for example, if you inject the code, you cannot execute it. So you don't need ISR anymore. Okay. Yes.
Not effective against,
Sorry?
not effective against jump-oriented programming attacks.
Yeah, that will not be, this will not be affected against jump-oriented or ROM. Yeah. Okay, so this is kind of my last slide, but I'm not ending the lecture here. I have notes, so I can follow from there. So, okay, ASLR, we have already covered it in the last lecture, but here are some more points about ASLR, which we need to be careful about. First thing is, we mentioned that last time that if we want ASLR to be effective, we need to randomize all the sections, like code, data, heap, stack, right? However, you cannot randomize the code if you don't have position independent executable compilation. Why? Before I explain why, let me explain what is the problem which is resolved, which is solved by pi. let's say we don't have ASLR, okay? And let's say I have a function located in my code segment. I'm naming it as function 1, and it is located at address 0xf0c30 blah blah something. And when I need to call let's say my program, let's say it's a library function, and my user program, when it needs to invoke this function, so let's say I simply say jump to, I'm writing in assembly 0xf0c30. Before that, I load, let's say, all the parameters and the registers here. Okay. I say jump, or I say, let's say, call whatever. Okay. So what will happen? My control will go to that function. I will start executing, and maybe I can even, let's say, I can say call, and then I will come back here right after I'm done with the function, right? Now, when I enable ASLR, what will happen? Next time, this function will not be mapped at the same address space. Let's say this time it is mapped at some other address, function 1, and this time it is 0xf340f0 something. My program will not work anymore, right? Because it is still pointing here, right? So what is the basic problem? That I'm using hard-code addresses in my program.
Is this in the program the user writes, or is this like compilation, like your compiler is converting this program into binary assembly and then binary?
No, after that it has been compiled and it is converted into binary or assembly, let's say. So one step before binary. Okay. So this is the code which your compiler generates, assembly code. Okay. So let's say, for example, you disabled ASLR and you use GCC and you ask GCC, okay, compile, generate the assembly file. Okay. So now what will happen that your compiler was expecting that your library is still there, right? It doesn't know that ASLR is enabled. So because both are not compatible. So what happens, it will still use the same address. So which basically mean we need to inform the compiler that ASLR is enabled, right? But even if we inform the compiler that it is enabled, what we need to do is we need to avoid the hard code addresses. So what we do is so the Pi solves this problem by removing the fixed or absolute addresses in such a way that any address of any function or any variable, it is specified in terms of relative address from the current instruction register plus offset. So let's say if current instruction register is pointing here, so then you will give the offset, okay, how many bytes you need to go backward or upward so that you can reach that location where my function is located, right? So let's say that first time the offset was, let's say 100 bytes, right? And now when ASLR is able, it mapped the function at some different location. Now you only need to change the offset as compared to this one, right? So this is what PIE does. So it will compile your program in a way that your assembly code will look like position independent. Okay, everything, all the addresses will be relative. Okay. So as a result, since now our addresses are relative, computed as IR plus offset, so it doesn't matter where ASL places, you just need to update your offset after every ASLR run. Okay. You don't need to. Now this is much easier as compared to after every SLR, you go and you change the absolute addresses, right? You only need to change the offset here. Everything else will remain same. Just consider to make it more simpler. Let's say offset is some global variable. So you just need to change the offset. Okay. Okay. Because for other instructions, maybe like if it is located here, something else will be, another function, maybe it will simply located at offset plus something, plus 10, plus 20, depending upon where it is located. Okay. The issue with Pi is that it incurs 10% extra overhead. And in the previous section, they explained that normally the industry practice it has been observed that industry doesn't adopt a solution if it has on average overhead of more than 5%. So having an overhead of 10% is a unwanted feature. Okay, so maybe I can stop recording here because after that there will be nothing on the